Hi. How seriously are we as a planet, as the human species, as business, society and policymakers committed to saving our planet? And to what extent are we prepared to change our behaviour, consumption, our entire economy and our existence to stabilise our climate and environment? Global human accelerated climate change represents, along with human overgrown population and resource pressures, the greatest threat to our own survival as a species. And this is scientifically validated by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the United Nations, and a whole host of scientific research and ample evidence, if nothing else, what the most extreme events have taught us. In July 2015, 196 nations ambitiously committed to attaining no more than a 1.5 degrees Celsius global average rise in temperatures. But now, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, even 4 or 5 degrees looks increasingly more likely. Countries were free to determine how best to attain that target with no penalties or incentives set, or requirements from the private sector or anything else via nationally determined contribution calculations and subsequent reduction methods. The UK and EU were subsequently joined by China, Japan, South Korea to carbon neutrality as nations by 2050, along with 15 to 20 other nations as of August-September 2021. Bhutan and Suriname went even further, committing to being carbon negative. The November COP26 event, organised by climate change activists such as Students for Sustainability, or the efforts and voices of those such as teenager Greta Thunberg, or the protests in London such as by Extinction Rebellion, along with more quieter approaches behind the scenes, such as Fridays for Future and other movements, have devoted, and along with policymakers behind the scenes at various COP events, including the one upcoming in Glasgow, have drawn attention of a resurgence in popular support for action and acting more decisively to implement real change. Recently, the Sustainable Ocean Alliance also committed to this, trying to link both global climate change and the blue economy with their Global Blue New Deal for the Youth, whereas other initiatives such as the Virtual Island Summit highlighted the plight of the young to their incredibly vulnerable circumstances. On the 12th of November 2020, China pledged to be the largest world's carbon emission trading scheme, and others. Other news includes pledges by industry, the financial sector, and others. And we really have to consider how to move forward. Yet we and our planet are rapidly running out of time for options. Global ecological restoration, rewilding of our oceans, rehabilitation and expansion, curbing population growth, achieving a truly sustainable circular economy, and being proactive against threats such as pollution, overfishing and poaching and others need rapid upscaling. Yet, without climate change, all these are mute, and we have to consider how realistic and feasibly we can achieve this 1.5 degree rise Celsius as a maximum target within the next few years. The good news is that it's highly possible and highly probable. This podcast is the fifth in my series of how to save the planet and create our future. And I, Dr. Jack Dyer, founder of Blue Economy Future, with PhD in climate change, master's degree in the blue economy and maritime sector, and a whole host of other opportunity areas, are here to tell you that it is humanly possible to achieve a 1.5 degree Celsius in the Paris Agreement, and it is realistically feasible. However, this may require embracing radical future-proofing climate change solutions, investigating terraforming, geoengineering blue carbon, and other negative net emission solutions. Many entrepreneurs and people out there are coming up with radical innovations, but they are not getting the support, the awareness, and concern that we as humanity ought to be affording them. Even if a number of the ideas fail, the fact is that without awareness we can achieve nothing. And of course, there's also the opportunities presented by the youth. So please feel free to get in touch at any time. Through my work at the World Ocean Council and other initiatives, I've become increasingly aware of the opportunities that we can do to save our planet. And these solutions include, but are not limited to, a number of core areas. In this, we'll be looking at a number of key trends and innovations. These include, but not limited to, the different solutions and policies that are involved. Because it's not enough to know what is going on with climate change, we have to look at extreme solutions such as biochar, afforestation, blue carbon, carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, possibly even solar radiation management, biochar, bioenergy, and other radical solutions, along with the innovative solution of entrepreneurs, and then decide how we are going to move forward. As a very specialist maritime economist, this is just representing some of my ideas. So my previous podcasts have touched what is the blue economy, why does it matter, why should we take it more seriously, but also what increasingly are the gravest of concerns and risks. Human global climate change is among the first and foremost of these risks, as stated. But then, of course, parallel to that is the loss of green and blue carbon, the loss of biodiversity, species extinction, migration, and resource pressures, and the reduction of many biodiversity, economic, social, environmental benefits. And we as humans no longer need to feel so worried and fearful about our future. We're here to say that there is a way, but we have to start thinking about embracing it. We need a new path, a new solution, one which prioritizes the planet first, considers Gaia, or our planet, and the way to save it as among the highest of all human endeavors. For we as humans have clearly had a chance to mess up the one planet that we hold most dearly, but we do not have to. If we act now, immediately, we can avert disaster, provided that we are willing to do whatever it takes. So, on the positive news, there has been a global commitment by many of the leaders of the High-Level Panel for a Sustainable Ocean Future, which embraces 14 of the world's leaders from the UK to Fiji, France, Norway, and others. Between these and the, in theory, principal commitment to the Paris Agreement, governments have sent a clear message that now more than ever they are at least prepared to consider climate change as an issue. However, this podcast argues that that in itself is insufficient. While many of these may be embracing solutions, very few of these will go far enough to embrace radical change of the scale that we need to avert disaster. Of course, the first and fundamental behaviour to achieving carbon emission would be to achieve massive decarbonisation of our economy and our supply chains, to achieve systematic adaptation and resilience in our infrastructure, our supply chains, and our processes, to embrace technology research and innovation, and to consider other radical solutions. But as time is running out, these solutions that I'm proposing here will not only help us to capture and deal with existing carbon that we are doing and help look for alternative source carbon and other greenhouse emissions and use alternative sources, but more equally fundamentally to make sure that such emissions are mitigated against and in fact are reversed or never even happen at all, so that we can even not only contain the damage that we have done, but also work to reduce them before it. In an about turn fast phase from previous successive generations, several of the previous stumbling blocks to climate change action have in fact been a number of politicians and a handful of core countries in particular, of which their excuse and their delays and their dithering have subsequently caused other countries to stall, particularly among the developing world, many of whom have tried to wriggle out of the fact that this is a problem that does not discriminate on the basis of impact will be felt by all, both the rich and the poor. The rich will have to deal, if nothing else, the rich will not be able to necessarily build safe havens and sanction, but will incur their own impact costs and damage, particularly among the migrants who will be fleeing to escape from all this. So, among the previous bigger barriers were countries such as China, Japan, Korea, and America, and even Australian denialism, which are all gradually starting to change their behaviour and their mindset. Businesses such as Google, Microsoft, the airlines, and so forth are physically investing in solutions to offsetting the emissions, achieving carbon neutrality, and even direct proactive measures in carbon capture and storage and direct funding. The insurance sector and financial sector, many of whom have started to look at pensions and so on, have started to divest rapidly from the concept of fossil fuel-based investments, and more private sector are looking to come up and support the entrepreneurs, the accelerators, and the innovators. This podcast, however, argues we really need to upscale radical progress. In the 11th and 20th November article in 2020 projected that we have to reduce a minimum of 10 to 20 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year by 2050 if we are to avert disaster. Again, as our most recent Intergovernmental Panel report, we can only emit another 300 gigatons before we have a complete and utter disaster. The planet has already reached its ecological threshold, as evidenced by unprecedented damage in sudden extreme events, from heat waves across Canada, Spain, Greece, Turkey, and so forth, droughts across Cape Town, the Middle and the rest of Southern Africa and the Middle East, huge swathes of disturbed locusts and other species around Ethiopia and East Africa, huge cyclone damages being caused in the Pacific and the Caribbean, storms across America, and other rapid disasters. And this has been translated into the fact that coal power sources, although many current industry fossil fuel advocates have thought to disguise themselves behind the problem of just carbon capture and storage. It must be noted, however, this is one of the most expensive options to produce per kilowatt hour compared to offshore renewable energy. And offshore, onshore, and land-based renewable energy will form the basis of another podcast, just as the previous podcast focused on maritime decarbonisation. This is to look at the natural and scientific measures of capturing carbon, storing, and reduce carbon dioxide and other emissions processes. It has also been calculated that even if we got rid of all emissions, we'd still have to capture, restore, recycle, or adequately deal with over 3 trillion tons of existing emissions. We need far more than the fraction of finance committed to it, such as the 24 million given to the US Department of Finance, and we need to really upscale beyond the minimal number of figures in process. So, what are these net emission technologies and solutions, such as including natural solutions and the blue carbon sources? Well, this podcast will touch upon a few of the major ones. They include not only the traditional method of afforestation and reforestation, as we've seen through trees and soil management. There's also concepts such as biochar, as we have seen, and bioenergy capturing and storage. And there's direct air carbon capture and carbon capture and utilization using technology to sort, address, and deal with existing processes. There's been talk of blue carbon and natural solutions such as planting seagrass, mangroves, wetlands, and so forth, as we will see. Then there are more controversial and experimental techniques that have only been hypothesized or tried on a very minor level due to uncertainty over international law and other processes, including ocean fertilization, alkalization, giant space mirrors and solar radiation management, interfering with the albedo effect, marine snow, cloud brightening, and other such measures. So as you can see, there are many different approaches, from using the mangroves, trees, and other solutions to enhanced weathering, biochar and oxidation techniques involving rocks and other mineralogical processes, to those involving seaweed, kelp, marine species such as whales, dolphins, and other measures, to techniques such as artificially inserting ocean upwelling, current drift, and so forth, as seen by the vessel on the left. We also have to look at the extreme solutions. Historically, nature has been the best architect and the greatest survival process of capturing, storing, and managing sequestration. This is why it is imperative that the peat bogs, the sea grasses, the kelp beds, the rainforests, the mangroves, the whales, the dolphins, and other species, salt marshes, and so on, are so really importantly protected. The marine ecosystem has a great basis of storing it, and it is rapidly feared that if we do not protect the rapidly melting ice caps, the tundra in Siberia with its methane stores, the mangroves, seagrass beds, and other approaches at rewilding, aside from all their other benefits, they help to prevent the problem from getting a lot worse. Therefore, it is inspiring. However, blue carbon processes have many other benefits to them, including employment, biodiversity, trade, income, biotechnology, research, innovation potential, and other livelihoods and other potential. But at the moment, we really need to do something. And the more areas that are protected and the more areas that are replanted, the more we can speed up the process. A couple of examples show that Oceans 2050 looked at capturing the measure of what global seaweed actually does for the world. And an example of in Namibia, where on the 2nd November 2020, a kelp farm showed that it is possible to offset blue carbon emissions while growing, while at the same time countering the climate emissions finance and so on. Other areas that are developing in blue carbon include that it has been speculated that aquaculture could be entirely eco-efficient with no emissions produced and even become carbon neutral, which would help provide food security and other myriad benefits. It has even been researched that certain red seaweed to methane may in fact actually help allow us to actually, in contrast to what some of the vegans and vegetarians might say, might encourage those who are unable or unwilling, and it is less practical to give up cattle and so on, such as in East Africa, Mongolia, the pampas of South America, and so forth, where cattle and other animals are particularly suitable, to say that if you could persuade the species to reduce their emissions, this would help. And methane is even greater contribution to climate change than carbon dioxide, but most of the time the emissions emphasis is on carbon dioxide when we really need to be looking at all gases. There is massive potential to counter it by rewilding and replanting our oceans. There's significant ecosystem benefits, particularly from mangroves if we were to plant them. However, it must be emphasized that more research would need to be conducted and measured and projects upscale to know which is the most effective species, types, and process in order to achieve the maximum greenhouse gas emissions reduction, sequestration, and other benefits. And again, we need to try and get more marine protected areas, both by the government and the governments and private sector initiatives such as the Waite Foundation, Global Blue Prosperity Coalition and others to rapidly work out sustainable blue economy finance initiatives. Again, the other most natural-based solution is that of afforestation. Afforestation has proved itself to be a natural carbon storage solution for millennia and longer, ever since human existence. It has a long track record of being proven to work, is relatively cheap, inexpensive, can also lead to employment, biodiversity, and other benefits. It is also, unlike more controversial methods, recognized and very comparatively uncontroversial. It is also heartening to note that countries such as Ethiopia and Armenia and Pakistan and China are particularly committed to afforestation, to reforest and green the Sahara and other initiatives as a basis upon curbing centuries of neglect and damage with other benefits. However, it must be noted with concern that while afforestation has many unquestionable and parallel benefits, it must be made sure that it is the most suitable solution at the appropriate time, because it takes a minimum number of 10 to 15 years for these trees to grow. They have to avoid monoculture crops and continue to grow continuously. It has to be considered the implications for local watercourses and grassland systems. There is also concern about the increased risks of heat waves, perhaps, and the fact that many afforestations might cause problems of local community friction and consultation. Other solutions include soil carbon storage and sequestration, which utilizes natural processes such as photosynthesis to break down and reduce carbon emissions through vegetation processes. Global carbon sinks, however, have become even more effective than the atmosphere, although less so than the oceans, at storing existing emissions. However, this process can be made more efficient. In fact, it has been considered that technological innovation and research could not only avoid soil loss and improve soil fertility, but these techniques could help capture up to 25% of global carbon emissions each year. Obviously, this depends on the location, soil, environment, and other qualities. An experiment that has been going on in China for the last 25 years has achieved a up to 200% increase in carbon emissions. This approach has been particularly popular in America as a way of linking it to agriculture-based initiatives, tax credits, and other solutions as incentives to help protect farmers, give them some incomes, reduce soil erosion, and other measures. Avoiding poor soil management and encouraging proper grasslands, other solutions, afforestation, and other techniques can be a particularly effective process. Using biomass and bioenergy can also capture carbon capture and storage, both through natural processes, such as those outlined on the left, to full industrial engineering plants, which converted to bioenergy as a basis for fuel, electricity, and other various uses and benefits. Then there's the advantages of measures and notions such as direct air capture technology. Direct air capture technology primarily uses technology and other chemical membrane processes solely to deal with capturing and storing, but not using whatever emissions are actually within the area. So although it avoids issues of land pressure, does not cause forestations and other techniques, and has a very good water usage, and is less controversial than many techniques, the project would, however, need to be scaled up far rapidly and far more commercially, and question would remain as to what to actually deal with the actual carbon emissions with storage and where they can be stored. It has, however, been proven to be a popular measure in the US Congress, particularly devoting more than half their budget for carbon technologies to this particular solution, including techniques such as artificial trees, iron resins, and other measures. It's also a way of making sure of dealing with the existing emission concentrations, and also encouraging industry that you can conduct business as usual to an extent, provided that you ensure that your sources of energy come from renewable clean energy sources, and that you can make sure that any emissions are actually dealt with and do not present a further threat or contribution to climate change. Alternatively, carbon capture and storage utilization is similar to direct air capture in the fact that it not only captures it, but more crucially, it actually comes up with a way of either storing or using the actual emissions. And there are different techniques which you can use, so through oxygen combustion and other processes. Scientifically, it is estimated that you could actually triple emissions reductions and achieve tens of thousands of tons a year emissions just from per plant, because there's only around 15 to 21 of these plants. But you could upscale it from 40 megatons to 100 or 1,000 or whatever you're prepared to do in order to do so. And if you were able to convert and use this this carbon for other uses such as hydrogen and other uses, you'd be able to power airships, cars, vessels, and tie into the whole maritime decarbonization of supply chains and other techniques. There is some growing interest, however, in the topic, with the UK devoting over £800 million, the US over £27 billion, and a number of core projects, which may reduce the tons at as low as 15 to 25 per tons if you can encourage businesses to actually go for it. I mean, one project alone in Norway could create another 4,000 jobs. And it is increasingly recognized that by governments that these two solutions may not be a permanent solution for everything, and that the better solution would be to reduce emissions at source. However, there is a core problem remaining of what to do with existing atmospheric concentrations, which suggests that these are necessary. The main problem with these is that they're not really publicly known or accepted, or partly controversial. There is the risk that it might encourage polluters to continue not investing in emissions, to continue creating problems of pollution and adding to climate change on the thought that they could just counteract these emissions. So it is a high risk, along with the risk from the public of the fact that they might not understand the benefits and need for these technologies and solutions. There is also the legal liability and other uncertainty as to what is the best way to deal with the carbon and other greenhouse gases emissions and to convert and other measures. Business, however, because of the lack of firm commitment by governments being signalled and the lack of incentives, policies, regulations and guidelines along this subject, many investors, insurance and most people have not really touched upon these areas. Across the world, it has shown that many different nations can capture thousands or millions of tons of emissions per year. So 2,000 gigatons could be done across South America. At a minimum, several hundred could be done across Europe. China in particular could do another 1,200 to 4,000 odd sources. The United States and Canada could do another up to 24,000 gigatons, and our oceans, if rewilded in solutions, could mop up the rest of the damage. So it's just to say that we can solve the problem of global climate change, provided we do a combination of all these technologies and solutions. It is with grave concern, however, that we note that many of these scales although the technology has gradually been proven itself from 1972, and there's been a handful of more projects being built, and another 20 or 30 planned for the next 5 or 10 years, it is a great concern that many of these remain only capable of doing a handful of few megatons relative megatons of carbon emissions at most, and we need a scale that is looking at thousands of gigatons per year, tens of thousands of gigatons. Similar problem exists with direct air capture facilities in that there are only a handful, and we really need to upscale progress. The next core technology is radical approach to dealing with extreme climate change solutions is that of bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. This utilizes natural trees, vegetation, and biomass processes, and then helps to combine it with processes that control greenhouse gas emissions, store it, and potentially use it or convert it to energy. For example, the Japanese, Toshiba and Toyota, have done a prototype using palm kernel shells with a target of 500 tons per day. Swedish and others are prepared to do it. And it has the potential to, reduce a significant amount of megatons, and even to be comparatively cheap. The main problem, however, is the fact that bioenergy on its own may have benefits, but with biofuel, food security, biodiversity, habitat loss, competing land pressures, chronic human overpopulation growth of 7 projected to be 9 or 10 million people within the next 20-30 years, there is clear evidence that over 700 million hectares of land, or over 50% of Earth's entire fertile land, would be necessary to solely save our planet, which is entirely impractical given existing usage, trying to protect reserves and other purposes. So bioenergy on its own is inefficient, but it can produce a complementary measure. One study estimated that it could store up to 14 to 19 billion pounds of carbon and up to 1,000 to 2,000 jobs, plus reduce over 106 million pounds of damage just in the UK alone. As I've said, is already a possible damage to other existing ecosystems. If you utilize existing char, you could increase even greater yield emissions per tension. And if you look at biochar and bioenergy carbon capture and storage, you can achieve more cheaper solutions. Biochar is a similar alternative. It tries to simulate natural processes through heat weathering, inserting carbon mining, and other processes to refine emissions and pyrolysis rather than major industrial processes. In some degree, it is a less efficient method of reducing emissions, as you still release 10% of emissions, but the benefit of using biochar is not only do you reduce emissions by 90%, but you get oil, electricity, energy, and you can improve average crop yields. So it is a better alternative than many others. One study in South Africa in 2015 said that if the country planted it, it could reduce up to 37 million tons and get up to 186 million euros in revenue just by looking at it. Then you have enhanced weathering and other techniques, which tries to speed up the rate that natural rocks can oxidize and mineralize, and natural processes which reduce the carbon intake over decades or many years. Unless you're artificially replicating the process, this solution can take a long time to break down carbon and other emissions processes. However, you could get at least another 2 gigatons of carbon dioxide each year. Bearing in mind you have to get at least another 80 to 100 or 200 gigatons to actually save us from climate change, so it is worth considering as another solution. You also have to make sure, however, that you do not interfere with dust, heat, and other processes. Then there's the extreme solution of ocean ion fertilization, which suggests, controversially, that you extend iron filings and other minerals to the oceans to try and enhance photosynthesis, breed artificial phytoplankton or algal blooms in order to somehow artificially improve the rate of carbon emissions, or pipes, artificial upwelling currents, and so on. There have been at least 30 to 20 main projects which have tried to deal with this process and reduce emissions. While it may have had minor effects on, as a research point of view, in reducing emissions, this method must be particularly cautioned, as although you could reduce significant amounts of emissions, there is grave uncertainty as to whether, first, this would have any impact on ecosystems, given the fact that we don't really understand and it's only been done on a pilot stage at the moment, or alternatively, international law prohibits commercial exploitation or addition of artificial substances unless by accident, i.e. marine pollution and so forth, and commercial utilization or profiting from the oceans. It is only justifiable are exceptions in this case for the basis of marine scientific research, but these are done on a pilot scale and might not have a full benefit or impact on the planet. Alternatively, ocean alkalization is very similar, but aims to reduce the damage to coral reefs and thus the role they play in suppressing greenhouse gas emissions and the additional acidity that these causes, and it proposes to do so through adding basalt, lime, or other more alkaline-based solutions to the processes. However, again, this is on an experimental basis and has similar problems or challenges, including legal, policy, and uncertain ecological benefits to the problem. It may be more expensive at $70 to $160 per ton, but this could in time be reduced to not only achieving hydrogen but also countering it as low as 3 to 5 per ton if upscaled. This has particularly received interest in Australia given the great threat and damage caused by the Great Barrier Reef, incurring unprecedented rates of coral bleaching and other solutions. However, these techniques with ocean island fertilization, ocean alkalization, have had their controversy, it must be noted. Civil society, for example, and a number of environmentalists and NGOs and researchers have been particularly uncertain as to whether humans should look at natural-based solutions or geoengineering-based solutions, as these are. The question mark will be, what impact will it help or hinder geoengineering on a mass scale? And we need to have some measure of what will actually happen, but it's not enough just to look at research, but we have to look at other implications and whether changes in ecosystems, climate change, marine pollution, human coastal resource pressures and others will cause a problem. I also previously spoke of a number of innovative core solutions which people are looking at to process it. These examples include trying to reduce the albedo effect through mirrors and solar radiation management. There's cloud seeding and marine cloud brightening through deliberately sending up seawater spray in vessels, or reflective mirrors in space, injecting things with aerosols and other solutions, or radioactive cooling, as various techniques which say that you can't which may be used as examples of geoengineering or consciously tinkering with the mechanisms of the ocean and its ecosystems or whatever, in an attempt to try and counter the damage that we as humans have already caused to our lands, our atmosphere, and our pollutions. Again, these measures are becoming more controversial, subject to certain dissent, and have not been officially condoned or endorsed by either the IPCC, the UN, or various government agencies. However, these must be borne in mind, as the longer we procrastinate and delay things, desperate times call for desperate measures. Cloud thinning is another technique along with radioactive cooling. We do not know what impact this will have, but we do know that there are high impact costs of climate change if we allow it to continue, and also in expanding up the costs of adaptation and responding to climate change. We can also look at assisted evolution, which combines blue-green solutions with technology through artificial reefs and species to try and encourage more natural species surviving, reducing blue carbon, but also dealing with pollution and others. As part of my work for the World Ocean Council, through my consulting work in the Caribbean, Africa, Pacific, and other areas as a youth ambassador and other initiatives, I became increasingly fascinated by the various measures in which exist out there. In particular, I'm part of the World Ocean Council network, which has created networks not only connecting the funders and the investors, but also looking at extreme climate change, ocean rewilding ecosystem solutions, and how we can really look at rapidly upscaling this. So for more information, please feel free to get in touch through my website, www.blueeconomyfuture.org.za, my other podcasts, through my LinkedIn profile on Dr. Japdar, Blue Economy Future SA, or through any of my contact details. And I would highly recommend that if people are really serious, they could do no worse than to support and look at these solutions. Examples of which includes artificial reefs and rebuilding, such as ocean habitats, biorock, coral reef, coral guardian, coral reef arcs, eco-cubes, and a number of the major solutions, interreefs and so on. Coral restoration, such as planting marine corals, is but one. Then there's looking at seagrass, rewilding, macroalgae, kelp forests, and others such as ocean foresters, and other techniques, carbon capture. Marine snow and rewilding solution has even been considered by GEA at 275 ocean carbon capital, or alternatively there are increasing number of stakeholders and platforms in which people can pay when identified to ensure that they're offsetting carbon properly and responsibly, such as NORI, or then there's ocean-based climate solutions, which is using artificial ocean currents upwelling, Oceanus, which looks at ocean seeding, wild currents, or ocean nourishment. Other solutions, as I said, apart from look at nature-based solutions such as sea forester or restoring sea forest-based solutions, include Project Vesta, which looks at enhanced weathering techniques and so forth. Sustainable Now, which looks at algae-based biotechnology. There's also 3D printing going on with Reef Design Lab and other solutions, and seaweed biofilter. And of course, many other traditional and physical solutions such as Charm, which is a coral-based replanting robot, as I say, enhanced weathering and oxidation techniques under Project Vesta, kelp replanting grafts, various coral block approaches, and others. In conclusion, we have to look at what we have to see about global climate change. If we are really serious about acting at climate change, we will soon see that now more than ever, global climate change presents an unparalleled opportunity to do something more active. Although many techniques are completely only at a pilot scale or trivial or controversial, such as ocean ion fertilization, alkalization, solar radiation, we might be forced to consider these desperate measures if we do not look for less controversial measures such as afforestation, blue carbon, enhanced weathering, and other solutions. It's also important to note that over 67% of our global energy is based on fossil fuels. Countries such as South Africa, Germany, Russia, and others, and huge part Nigeria and other parts of Africa, and the fossil fuel-based economies, such as in the Middle East, are still highly reliant on this bedstone of their economy or to drive their fuels, their industry, and so forth. So we have tremendously problems. Even if we cut emissions by 80%, we'd still have to reduce 10 to 20 or 30 gigatons each year. We also have to make sure that whatever solution we do, we don't make the problem fundamentally worse. We reduce our impact on the planet, we counteract the emissions, and that if we do catch and store these emissions, that we can either utilize them or store them safely so that they no longer become a threat. Additionally, we have less than 230 gigatons less to try and also 300 to 200 gigatons to try and achieve a 1.5 degrees target. Afforestation could get rid of 3 of those gigatons each year. Soil energy, another 2 to 3. Enhanced weathering, another 1 to 3. Direct air capture, carbon capture utilization, and blue carbon would swallow up the rest. It's also benefited that you could get another over $6 trillion of health, pollution, and other benefits, improve the economy by over $26 trillion, and create over 20 million jobs, which would more than offset the 7.4 million jobs lost to many fossil fuel dependent industries. And there's a serious growth in place, and particularly in hydrogen, maritime decarbonisation, and others. Many country regions, such as the UK, California, and so on, it's really quite cost effective to do so. So, moving forward, what can we do to solve our planet's problems and its effects? Well, we can look to do action against the UNESCO Ocean Decade, the World's Ocean Council Roundtable, which regularly unites the private sector. We can help support and create a business. We can donate to aid agencies to act against climate change and mitigation and adaptation. We can look to enter competitions, prizes, and events if we really have great new ideas such as Carbon X Prize, Earthshot, and others. Or they can inspire us that there's hope. There's also funding and investment opportunities in terms of the green and blue ocean economy, which looks at rewilding, investing in replanting kelp, algae, seaweed, and other solutions to try and mitigate or adapt. Investable oceans is what some of the investors are doing. And of course, there are many entrepreneurs that deserve our support. Above all else, we need to try and get more and more people incited, enthusiastic, and capable. We've got to try and replant massively to counteract deforestation. We need to really reduce our impacts. We need to curb the penalties to any country, any region, any area that goes for chronic virgin mass decarbonisation, imposing strict penalties and taxes, and really counteract, unfortunately, countries such as my own, South Africa, that really chronically hate trees. There can be no denying that these are unprecedented times in our planet's history.